Welcome back to the VEX classroom. In this video, we will be examining the catapult on the CatapultBot and looking at 3 specific questions as to how this bad boy functions. We're going to examine what is a catapult, how does the catapult work on the CatapultBot, and what makes this catapult effective. So without further ado, let's get on into this. Now, in simple terms, a catapult is a simple lever-style mechanism used to launch objects over a given distance. In our case, we will be launching these buckyballs, and our catapult actually uses rubber bands as the force to launch these objects. Similar to whenever you extend a rubber band and let go, that rubber band wants to retract back to its normal position. So we will be using the potential energy stored in these rubber bands right in the back to launch our objects. Let's see how this catapult actually functions through our build instructions. So as we've just said, our catapult uses rubber bands in order to retract our arm back to that top position, and that snapping mechanism will actually launch our objects, in this case buckyballs. We can see we have already attached our rubber bands to the back side of our arm as well as an anchor point at the bottom of the robot. Let's see what this looks like on our physical robot. So as we're looking at this, we can see our catapult arm here. This can go up and down, and it has a lot of varying force whenever I push it down, thanks to those rubber bands that we can see in the back. So we have our anchor point here, which is located on the bottom of the robot, which is a secure connection. And then we can see the rubber bands will actually snake through and attach directly to the back half of this lever arm. It's actually levering about that shaft that's in there. So because we have the force applied pulling on one side, as that force is pulling on one side, it'll snap the arm back to its original position. Just like that. Whenever the arm stops, that buckyball or whatever object is located in that claw will want to continue going. Thanks to a couple different laws of physics, it will want to keep going. So because that lever arm stops, that buckyball will then be launched and to continue on its journey. Now, as we briefly mentioned, the catapult actually gets all of its force out of these rubber bands. So the more rubber bands you put onto the catapult, the stronger the launching mechanism will be. And vice versa. The less rubber bands you have, the weaker your arm will be. We'll explore that later on in the video. So from the build instructions, it said to add 4. This is the source of our power in conjunction with this motor. You'll see this red gear back here can actually rotate in one direction. And once it gets to the pinnacle of its rotation, it will actually release that arm. It uses these standoffs to push the backside of that lever style arm up. And then once it gets just a little bit too far, it does not support the arm anymore, thus letting that catapult fly loose. So as we mentioned, our catapult's arm is powered due to the multiple rubber bands constantly pulling that arm into this upward position that we can see here, as well as this motor right here causing these entire gear sets to turn, which in turn lets the arm either retract or send loose. So let's see this arm actually in action. So whenever we go ahead, we want to first have the claw down. You know, whenever we're intaking a buckyball, it wants to go into the claw, so it needs to be down. Once we go ahead and power that arm all the way down, we are then able to drive over to a buckyball and use that intake mechanism in order to put a buckyball inside of that claw. But now next, whenever we turn our motor just a little bit further until that standoff is no longer supporting that arm, it will cause those rubber bands to retract, thus throwing that arm up until it stops, throwing our buckyball. Just like that. Let's see that again. Now remember, we need to put our arm down after each shot so that we can intake another object. We're going to go ahead and actually intake an object. And what I'm going to do next is intake a second object, which will make it a lot easier whenever it comes to launching again. So we have an object in our claw and an object in the intake ready to go. This will allow me to fire in quick succession. Another step as to how the CatapultBot is so effective. We have our mechanism holding our arm down, ready to be launched, which we can launch on the count of 3. 3. Then I can simply put our arm back down. Because I already have another buckyball ready to be intake, it'll go straight into the claw, ready to be launched again. So as I mentioned before, the CatapultBot actually gets all of its strength from those rubber bands. Less rubber bands means less strength, more rubber bands means more strength. So if you've ever come to find that you need more strength on your CatapultBot, you can simply remove that back plate on the backside of your catapult arm. This is just to ensure that the catapults, or the rubber bands, do not come loose through use. So once you go ahead and unscrew those 2 specific screws underneath the brain mount, you can have access to the rubber bands. I'll fast forward until I get that off. Once you go ahead and remove that back plate, we can actually see where the rubber bands are being wrapped around. They're being wrapped around those 2 standoffs. Be very careful you don't accidentally knock one of those rubber bands off. They are in the location that they need to be, so we don't want them to fall off and accidentally give us more work. As well as, don't forget or don't lose that specific piece in order to mount that rubber band bracket back on. In order to add more power to our catapult, all I simply am going to do is add another rubber band. I want to make sure that this 5th rubber band that I'm adding does go around both of those standoffs, which I can see there. And I'm just going to hold it in the back just for now with my index, with my thumb, as I go ahead and reattach that bracket plate. It's helpful to hold the CatapultBot just a little bit forward so nothing will fall off and it will technically be holding flat. You can get some of these screws close by finger tightening them and then going back at it with the tools in your kit. So I'll fast forward it until I get this bracket on. Now that I have gone ahead and added that flat beam back on, as well as those 2 screws to those standoffs, I'm left with that rubber band still extruding out of the back half of that arm. I want to make sure that that rubber band ends up all the way back to the anchor point. So I'm going to snake it through the build, making sure it does not go between any of the standoffs, and it sticks with all of its friends, securely mounting itself to that anchor. Now I have just increased the power of our catapult simply by adding another rubber band onto this mechanism, which is the powerhouse of this cell. Recall from a little bit ago whenever we tested out our CatapultBot with 4 rubber bands. Now that we have 5 rubber bands on, you can see just how much more power it actually has. I was barely able to catch that. Now that we have covered what a catapult actually is, that simple lever-styled arm that will launch objects over a distance, we've covered what that catapult is. We've covered how does this catapult work on the CatapultBot simply due to the rubber bands as well as that rotating gear mechanism in the back, which raises and lowers the arm, letting it to snap and throw our objects. Lastly, we're going to look at what makes this catapult effective. This is due to, in part, all of the combinations that we have already covered. So thankful to the rubber bands, to the gearing mechanism that is in the back of the robot, as well as our intake device, we are able to quickly grab these buckyballs and launch them over a certain distance very accurately thanks to our controller capabilities with our motors and the preciseness of our gear mechanism to launch this catapult. I hope that all this information was helpful, and I can't wait for you to begin testing your catapult on the CatapultBot now that you understand the majority of factors and forces at play. I will see you in the next video.